When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go.
Hello and welcome to this special virtual symposium celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month, commemorated every May in the United States. I'm your host, Lauren Izzo. It is a pleasure to have you all with us today. Today's event is called Let My People Go, Jewish Americans and the Soviet Jewry Movement, Lessons in Solidarity for Today's Struggle Against Antisemitism, and it's hosted by Combat Antisemitism Movement in partnership with the National Museum of American Jewish History and the National Coalition Supporting Eurasian Jewry. With us today during the whole broadcast is Natan Sharansky, famous refusenik and human rights activist. Natan is also an advisory board member of the Combat Antisemitism Movement. Thank you, Natan, for joining us today.
Thank you.
This truly remarkable event will reflect on the heritage of Jewish Americans and the community's history of activism. Since the first Jews arrived 400 years ago in the colonies that would become the United States, Jews have played an integral role in the American story, making unique contributions to American society. Beginning in the middle of the last century, the Free Soviet Jewry movement caught the attention of leaders in the United States and across the globe, and was a unifying moment for all of American society, blending grassroots activism and political advocacy. The hard-fought, decades-long campaign brought together people of all backgrounds, and it culminated in millions of Jews behind the Iron Curtain, being allowed to emigrate and practice their religion freely. Today, the societal sickness of anti-Semitism is flaring up yet again, targeting Jewish communities in the United States and across the globe. In the last week alone, Jewish Americans and Jewish communities around the world have witnessed a horrifying spike in anti-Semitic hate crimes. The Community Security Trust has reported a 600% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the UK in the last 2 weeks alone. And preliminary ADL data shows a more than 60% rise in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. We've watched in horror as Jews have been attacked in the streets of major cities such as Los Angeles, New York, Toronto, my hometown, London, Berlin, and elsewhere. With that said, the American Jewish community's history of activism and the success of the Soviet Jewry movement offer powerful lessons for today's struggle against Jew hatred. Today's symposium will celebrate the cross-communal partnerships forged with people of all backgrounds to achieve the movement's goals, while exploring insights on how to mobilize a new generation to unite and defeat anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry. Coming up, we'll hear from some of the leaders of the Free Soviet Jewry movement, along with grassroots activists and political activists. We are live on Zoom, on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And please remember, if you miss anything or have to step away for a moment, a recording of the entire event will be uploaded and made available for online viewing on the symposium's website and the Combat Antisemitism Movement's social media platforms. Now, to moderate our opening conversation, we now have the honor to welcome Dr. Anita Friedman, head of the Jewish Family and Children's Services in the San Francisco Bay Area and board president of the Koret Foundation, one of the Bay Area's most prominent philanthropies. A distinguished speaker, lecturer, and author, Dr. Friedman's areas of expertise include social policy and programming for diverse populations, the provision of health and human services, and the development of innovative social enterprise business models. She's also an expert on Holocaust and genocide education and is the editor of the English language edition of Rika's Diary, the producer of a major upcoming documentary on Jewish life in Eastern Europe. Dr. Friedman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you and to be with our guests at this very important occasion. I was very involved in the Soviet Jewry movement, as were so many other people. I suspect some people on the call actually were not very involved, and will learn a lot from this conversation. And some of us who have been involved, I think, have a lot of lessons that we can share. It was an extraordinary experience, a unifying experience for the American Jewish community for world Jewry. It probably represented the extraordinary success, probably one of the two great successes of the 20th century, along with the establishment of the State of Israel, the largest orderly migration of a people probably in human history. It taught us a lot of lessons about interfaith partnerships, about mobilizing the grassroots, and about working together for common cause. And these are all very important elements of what we need to think about with regard to what we're facing right now, which I think all of our listeners know is an extraordinary and profound and alarming level of anti-Semitism worldwide, but now especially in the United States. So we have the honor at this special virtual symposium to have with us two of the people who know the most about the American Jewish experience and what happened with the Soviet Jewry movement. We want to focus on the American Jewish experience because we are celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month, which highlights both the triumphs and the tragedies of the American Jewish story. So I want to welcome to our conversation my friend, Natan Sharansky, 9 years in Soviet prisons, a leader and inspiration for the entire movement, has gone on to do extraordinary things in many other ways on behalf of the Jewish people. And we're really, really happy to have you with us today, Natan, to share your views.
Thank you.
We also have with us Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Malcolm Hoenlein, founding Executive Director of the Greater New York Conference on Soviet Jewry, who helped to lead the campaign in the United States on behalf of Soviet Jews. They'll reflect on the history of the movement, and there are no other people that I can think of in this world who know more about this experience and who have greater insight that can help us go forward. So thank you for helping us to celebrate Jewish American Heritage Month, Malcolm and Natan. And I want to start with a few questions for you, Natan.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit to start with about how you became a dissident. How did you get involved in this whole effort in the Soviet Union, and especially what was the role of the American Jewish community in the movement? Because again, some of us know this information, but many people are entirely new to this whole story.
Well, I was a typical assimilated Soviet Jew, what means that there was nothing Jewish in our life, no holidays, no faith, no language, no tradition, nothing. But the only Jewish thing was a lot of anti-Semitism. And a lot of anti-Semitism in the street and in the policy. There was nothing positive in this. You simply try to adjust. You were born with this disease, which was written in the ID of your parents, Jew. So you learn how to live with this disease. You must be the best in physics, mathematics, and your professional success will help you to live with this. It changed after the Six-Day War when Israel entered our life in a very powerful way, huge humiliation for Soviet Union. And suddenly you see that everybody looks on you and says, how you guys did it? How I did it? I want to understand. That's when we started reading really the underground, the books about ourselves. Now, it took time for me to join. I actively joined our movement in 1973. But before, in 1970, there was Leningrad trial, famous Leningrad trial, when a group of Jews tried to hijack the airplane to reach Israel. And they also organized education, Zionist education in Leningrad. And 2 of them were sentenced, got death sentences. And all over the world, there were demonstrations and protests, of course, first of all, in the United States of America. And then Soviet Union retreated. They replaced these death sentences to the 15 years. And we, those who know the power of this awful terrorist dictatorship, which keeps under the fear 200 million people. And the idea of these tough sentences was to stop this growing efforts for migration of Soviet Jews. We understand that it must be really big power, these American Jewish organizations. We didn't yet know it, we didn't feel it. We heard on Voice of America, BBC, the protests, but then you understand, no, that's really big power. And later, when I became an activist, then a spokesman of a movement, and met physically with hundreds and hundreds of Jews who were coming as tourists, who were sent by Israel, but mainly they were sent by different Jewish organizations. And then I, as a spokesman, had to learn that there is Conference on Soviet Jewry, and Council on Soviet Jewry, and Coalition for Soviet Jewry, and Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry, and 35 wonderful organizations, many others. I didn't have yet the name for this, but I could see that there is a bridge, the live connection which we have with the world Jewry because of these Jews and their organizations who are every day, whatever station are sent, and then there were telephone calls, and then the struggle for changing American laws. We'll talk probably about it, Jackson Amendment and so on. And you see this growing power. And only later, when I was on the interrogations in the KGB, I think the KGB gave the great title for this. They said, who you think will help you? Look, there are only a bunch of students and housewives, and we are KGB. And that was a great definition, because then, many years after, when I was released, I had to go from one place to another and to thank this army of students and housewives who defeated the army of KGB. That was really the heart of this mobilization of American Jews for 25 years, and we felt it and we saw it, and the only way why our struggle, the struggle of hundreds, even thousands of Jews who rediscovered their identity, could succeed against this most powerful dictatorship, is because even before we started our struggle, it was already the struggle of all the Jews of the world, and first of all, American Jewry, who was organized and who gave us such a strong support.
What an amazing journey you've had. Dr. Friedman, would you like to ask a follow-up question to Mr. Sharansky?
I was just thinking that one of the books that I love very much is Natan's most recent book, your book that you did with Gil Troy, called Never Alone. Okay. And that's a wonderful title, because I suspect that's exactly how you were feeling, or gave you strength all those years alone behind the Iron Curtain. Well, I recommend it highly. I think anybody who really wants to understand what happened should read this wonderful book.
Well, I think I was really very lucky that before I went to prison, I had few years of this full of struggle and meeting with hundreds of American Jews who later were all on the list of my accomplices. And that's why when KGB was explaining me that now I'm alone, that people are afraid even to mention my name, that is the end of Zionism, it was simply enough to remember the enthusiasm, the determination of all those people that I was meeting, or those that were speaking by telephone, like Michael Sherburne, that simple Russian teacher of Russian from London. And I had thousands of telephone calls every day, whatever is the jamming, whatever he's trying to get this information. And these women who, one woman from Philadelphia, another from Miami, who were trembling from fear when they were taking from us documents which they had in their underwear to take to their own airport and then to their Jewish organizations. And these were our appeals to Senator Jackson, to American leaders, to Israel, to Jewish world, where we were describing our situation and appealing for their support. When you remember this determination and devotion of all these people, who were, by the way, even trembling from fear, they were telling, no, you don't understand. It's not that I'm doing you a favor, you're doing me a favor. I really want to be part of this Jewish history, of this Jewish struggle. So it was clear for me that these people will never stop, even for one day, the struggle, and that's why I really never felt alone when I was in prison.
And one of those people who made sure that you never felt alone was Malcolm Online. Malcolm, you have been an extraordinary leader of the American Jewish community on many different fronts over many different decades. One of the earliest areas of your leadership was in the area of freedom for Soviet Jewry. What's your story? Personally, what motivated you to spend so much of your time as a leader of the Soviet Jewry movement and to have done so much for Natan and actually hundreds of thousands of other Jews?
Well, thank you, and it's an honor and a privilege to be part of this event. Actually, I began at a very young age getting involved in politics because I know that it was the Shoah that influenced me from the time I was old enough to understand it, and learned that my own grandparents, aunts and uncles were killed, that Jews could no longer live at the sufferance of others, that we had to have the political clout, the involvement to be able to affect our own fate. And from my early teens, I was involved in the Soviet Jewry movement in Philadelphia and started the first demonstrations, and came to New York to meet with Jacob Birnbaum, as he describes, a skinny little teenager coming there. Yeah. But I really believe that never again had to be a pledge that every generation took, and especially young Jews, that if we are to learn and did learn the lessons of the past, that we would never allow Jews to be alone. You know, Elie Wiesel wrote the book Jews of Silence about Russian Jews. It was not true. The Jews of Russia were kept silent. We were the Jews of silence. And I think that this was a revolutionary turnabout, that Jews understood that we were not going to let the mistakes of the past occur again. And it motivated me, and mobilized my friends, and it was a student movement to start. It was young people who led it. And inspired. And as I have told Natan in the past, I think Russian Jews saved more of our children than we saved of theirs. It became a movement, not an organization. When I came to New York, people said to me, "You're crazy, Soviet Jews will never be free." I was teaching at Penn. I was finishing my doctorate there. And I came to New York for 2 years, which ended up being 50, but to start the conference on Soviet Jewry in New York, and to mobilize people. New York, had 5,000 people at a demonstration, and that set the standard for the rest of the country. To have 1,000, 1,500 in Philadelphia, we actually had bigger demonstrations than in New York. And we built this grassroots movement, but that merged it with the establishment. They were operating on different planes, and Soviet Jewry became the vehicle to bring the total community together across all boundaries. And it shows again the lesson of history. When there's achdus, unity in the Jewish community, we can overcome everything. When Jews are divided, every challenge is too great. Soviet Jewry brought us all together. And while there were divisions and differences and different organizations, the fact is we had one goal. And I think that the Russians were shocked to face this wall of opposition of Jews coming together, demonstrating our responsibility for one another. And this, to me, was the ultimate expression that never again, not a hollow phrase that we yell at rallies, but a pledge that we have to educate. And it's a glorious moment that should inspire us today. I got arrested on my first trip to Russia on the kind of mission that Natan mentioned, and my wife and I were held in Kishinev. And yet I was never afraid, because I knew that this was a holy and sacred purpose, and that whatever would happen to us, pale in comparison to what was happening to Russian Jews who put their lives on the line. And that galvanized us after the Leningrad trials, that enabled us to create the conferences and on Soviet Jewry, and to really bring out hundreds of thousands of people into the streets for the first time probably in American Jewish history.
So what can we learn from this experience? We now are faced also with extraordinary worldwide anti-Semitism. The Soviet Jewry movement was in many ways one of our finest hours as an American Jewish community. You said the young people were mobilized, worked with the establishment in common cause. Although I will say, as an aside, that it appears now that there was common cause. But Natan, you always made a really interesting point about how political action takes place. It wasn't as unified as it appeared, even though on the grander scheme, it was a common goal that was shared by all the organizations. Some of the organizations didn't always work together so cooperatively. Is that right?
It's true. And it was sometimes hard cobbling things together, but ultimately they did. And whatever egos were involved or institutional interests, that's why creating a movement was so critical. That's why not having another organization, but something in which everybody could play a role and everybody could have their own visibility and organizational identification was so important. I know people who lost their jobs because of their involvement. Many of them really devoted their whole lives to this, not just housewives, business people, other people. We had divisions, even on Jackson Vanik. Most of the community didn't support it. So there were internal struggles, but ultimately we came together.
Well, we didn't do it alone. We did it in cooperation with government. We did it in cooperation with other groups, with allies. That was very important to the movement as well, I imagine.
It was very important.
First, you want to comment on that, because these are all important lessons that I want to highlight, because we really want to talk about what does all this mean to us as American Jews now, to young people, to people of all ages, to our institutions, with regard to the issues that we're facing right now, which are really quite serious.
Unity, by the way, is not equal to homogeneity. It didn't mean that we disrespect differences. We could learn to live with the differences, but recognize that we have one faith and one fate, and that what we have in common far outweighs our differences. And it was only through the collectivity that we could protect Jewish interests. Today, we don't have that kind of common sense and of responsibility and larger view of events. And we see more and more divisiveness, which has always been the danger to the Jewish community. More than any external danger, it's internal divisiveness and ignorance and indifference were the greatest threats to the Jewish people throughout our history. And today, I think young people could learn a lot and be inspired, not just Russian Jews, but that because of that, we stood up for Syrian Jews and Iranian Jews and Iraqi Jews and Yemeni Jews and Ethiopian Jews, who all of them had written off to history and all are today home. And largely because we have a state of Israel. But the Soviet Jewry movement was a nexus for this.
Natan, you want to comment on this, because you have devoted a lot of your life to stitching together the Jewish people. And you have a lot of insight about this issue of unity, what we can learn from the Soviet Jewry movement that really needs to guide our efforts as the leadership of the Jewish community going forward.
Okay, so I really want to comment on this issue. Should we be afraid that we have disagreements? I think it is a blessing that we have disagreements, as long as we remember that we are one family, one Jewish people who want to go through the history together. And then, I, as the activist and then a spokesman of our movement, had a big headache from the fact that there were so many different organizations who were competing with one another. And sometimes you had to take risk twice and to put these tourists under the risk twice in order they'll deliver the same statement to two different organizations, which are both in Manhattan and New York, because they don't cooperate with one another. But with the time you understand, especially when I was in prison and when I see during interrogations how all these organizations and conference and coalition and union and 35, all of them are on the same list of anti-Soviet organizations. And you understand what a blessing it was that we could reach everybody. We could reach students and housewives and philanthropists and federations and religious circles and people who were absolutely liberal and secular, who simply came straight from the struggle for human rights with Martin Luther King, and now they joined our struggle. Because of all these differences of opinions, we could reach everybody. And after all, for KGB, they didn't care. They didn't know even that we have all these disagreements, because it was one movement which was fighting for the release of Soviet Jews. So I'm not afraid that we have disagreements. It helps us to involve different groups in our mutual struggle. But when, as sometimes it happens now, when people lose the sight that we are one family, that we have mutual past and mutual future, then the real problems begin.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that is one of the differences that we see now. It seemed that everybody, even though there were differences among people in the Soviet Jewry movement, people ultimately were able to set aside their personal differences and even their personal feelings for the greater good. And the challenge now is, are we going to be able to do that with regard to the current challenges? How do we go forward? What's your advice? If you have advice for the Jewish community, especially in the American Jewish community context, what's your advice from your experience of all these years of leading the Jewish people? Not an easy task. It wasn't easy for Moses. It's not easy for us either. What's your advice?
My advice is, first of all, always remember that historically, there is no difference for us between those who hate Jews, those who hate Jewish religion, or those who hate Jewish state. And we should not permit anti-Semites to divide us. It is okay to be very strong liberal on the left. It is okay to be very strong conservative on the right. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, remember, first of all, you have to fight anti-Semitism in your own camp. The problem today is that people on the left are very happy to declare that all the real anti-Semitism on the right. They say, look, there are those who are killing people in the synagogues. You cannot compare it with a bunch of students on the camps who are overacting. And people on the right are very happy to say, look, there on the campuses, we have real BDS, we have real organization, we have real finances. And these, on the right, they're on the wolves. And the problem is that if that's how you think and act, you can have no influence. Because accusing the other side in anti-Semitism doesn't give you real influence. We have to fight anti-Semitism everywhere. And liberal Jews, first of all, have to concentrate what is happening today on the campuses, just in these days. And people on the right have to look at all these right-wing organizations and attacks on Jews by some crazy right-wingers. And altogether, we have to fight against anti-Semitism of Hamas and those who want to destroy us. And it's not happening because we permitted, on the issue which for 1,000 years was uniting all of us. It was so clear that when it is a blood libel, it doesn't matter whether they are religious or non-religious. Whether it's blood libel in Russia or in Iraq, all the Jewish world was united. We lost it today. Our political polarization is so strong that it makes us blind. And that's something that we have to challenge.
And Malcolm, do you want to comment on this? Your
First, I fully concur, but yes, I think that there are several things. As I said before, the greatest dangers we face that Moses taught us in the midst of Hakel, that the greatest danger is not external threats or wars or natural disasters for Jews. It's apathy and indifference. And we have a generation that's growing up in ignorance. And that is something you can't overcome. If the kids don't have a sense of passion, if they don't have a sense of involvement, that overcomes those differences. It doesn't erase them. We can respect the differences. We're not asking people, to build Levittowns that everybody looks alike, thinks alike, dresses alike. We want to have the diversity, but on the other hand, there has to be some common values and common purpose that will unite us and enable us to work together. So the first thing is that we have to educate our young. It's not enough to send them to Israel on a birthright trip, as important as that is, but ignore them the first 17 years of their lives. We have to start, as the Catholic Church says, give me a kid till he's 6, you can have him the rest of their lives. We have to start educating our children. We don't understand. They form their views younger and younger. They have access online to all the horrible information, which distinguishes our time from the time 50, 70 years ago, that it takes nanoseconds to spread a big lie that Hitler took a year to do. We see it now with the thousands of anti-Semitic websites, and only a combined effort, a unified effort, can really begin to face that. So one is education. We are in a war against the Jewish people, the Jewish faith, the Jewish past, the Jewish future, and they make no distinction. It's from the left, it's from the right, it's from Islamists, it's from other sources. This is a watershed period, I believe. And I think the events of the last days were watershed events. We're not going to be able to put this genie back in the bottle. There are things that took place, which I won't go into now, which I think will be here with us for a very long time. Perhaps it's a permanent change in this. So number one, we have to develop Jewish leaders. We have to educate them, motivate them, give them a sense of Jewish content. They have to know who they are, who we are, our heritage, such a beautiful heritage, to share not just the tsaros of being a Jew, but the miracles and the victories of being a Jew to young people today. And what I call the smorgasbord approach, I want them to see something that can attract everyone, that everybody ought to be able to identify with some activity, some part of the Jewish people. Soviet Jewry offered that. an 85-year-old man came with a $5 bill after the first Solidarity Day to my office. And he said, it's the first Jewish thing I did in my life. He said, you've changed my life at 85. And that's what I said before, that we transformed more lives in America, I think, than elsewhere, that they got a sense of Jewish identity, Jewish involvement, Jewish community. And that is being lost. So we have to collectively, as Natan said, it's not to erase those differences, but to recognize that we have a common fate and that the whole is far greater than the sum of the parts, that all of us need to be involved. No organization, no single person or anybody can do everything, but collectively we can. And that is, I think, the core of our reboot, of this responsibility that we have for one another. I remember a cab driver picked me up after one of the demonstrations, and he said, where in Russia are your parents from? I said, they were from Germany. He said, so why would you do that? Why were you demonstrating? Baptists didn't demonstrate for the Baptists in Russia who were suffering terribly. Others didn't. It became a cause that could unite across all boundaries. We had Blacks for Soviet Jewry, Hispanics for Soviet Jewry, doctors, lawyers, everything. People are looking to us for leadership. They will be there, but we have to be there first. And we still have real challenges to Jewish security in Europe, in the United States, globally, and can't take Israel for granted either. Make it a positive cause for young people. Show them the excitement. Look at all the great archaeological discoveries, which nobody shares with young people, all of which are consistent with the Tanakh and Jewish history. Give them a sense of being, of well-being, of participation, of importance, and empower them. Give them a sense that they are really significant to the Jewish community.
Beautifully said, Malcolm and Natan. I think both of you set the example that inspire young people even today. You know, I work with tens of thousands of families, Jewish families, and I see the internal working of thousands of families and how children are being raised. And even in spite of all the differences and the fragmentation and the struggles and the tensions over Israel, I think that the meaning and the power of finding meaning in who you are, in your story, overrides all of that. And I see lots of young people, and all the research that's recently come out also underscores that people find great meaning and inspiration in being a member of the Jewish people and contributing to the greater good. And I think that's part of what the Soviet Jewry movement teaches us, that when we come together, we can accomplish something that's great for all of us, but also great for the whole world. Because the Soviet Jewry movement was a contribution to the world. It wasn't just a contribution to strengthening the Jewish people. And those are in many ways one and the same. That is in many ways the purpose of the Jewish people, is to move this imperfect world in a better direction. So I want to thank both of you for this wonderful conversation, for sharing your stories, and for having worked your entire lives to strengthen the Jewish people and make the world a better place. So God bless both of you, and thank you. And we look forward to many more successes going forward.
And thank you, Dr. Friedman, for facilitating this really important and interesting discussion. Wow, that was a truly powerful experience, hearing firsthand from someone who experienced Soviet brutality personally, and from one of the leaders of the campaign for Soviet Jews in the United States. We hope you learned or had your memory refreshed about the storied history of the movement. Jewish Americans were not alone in the fight on behalf of their beleaguered co-religionists in the Soviet Union. Intercommunal partnerships were critical to the success of the movement, and one of the most famous non-Jews to speak prominently on the issue was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let's hear his words now from December 1966.
These challenging words affirming the interdependence and interrelatedness of all mankind are particularly relevant when we think of the plight of 3 million Jews in the Soviet Union. No person of goodwill can stand by as a silent onlooker while there is a possibility of the complete spiritual and cultural destruction of a once flourishing Jewish community. A denial of human rights anywhere is a threat to the affirmation of human rights everywhere. While Jews in Russia may not be physically murdered as they were in Nazi Germany, they are facing every day a kind of spiritual and cultural genocide. Negroes can well understand and sympathize with this problem. When you are written out of history as a people, when you are given no choice but to accept the majority culture, you are denied an aspect of your own identity. Ultimately, you suffer a corrosion of your self-understanding and self-respect.
Anti-Semitism and racial prejudice still pose clear dangers to the Jewish and African American communities in the United States today. The only way to fight these disturbing trends and to build a better future is for communities to work together for positive change as they have in the past. To help rekindle these bonds, we can look to a prime example of Black-Jewish partnership from the 1960s. One of Martin Luther King Jr.'s top Jewish partners in the civil rights movement was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, whom King described as a truly great prophet. Rabbi Heschel fled Poland prior to the Nazi invasion and immigrated to the United States, and was an active participant in the civil rights movement, famously marching with King in Selma in March 1965. Today, we have with us Rabbi Heschel's daughter, Dr. Susanna Heschel, an Eli M. Black Distinguished Professor of Jewish Studies at Dartmouth College. She will share with us more about her father's relationship with Martin Luther King Jr. and his work on Black-Jewish relations during the civil rights movement. Professor Heschel, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And such an honor to meet Natan Sharansky, even only in Zoom. My father first met Dr. King in January of 1963 at a conference on religion and race in Chicago, where each one gave a keynote address. And somehow they met, and even though they came from such different backgrounds, they came together, they bonded. And I think what brought them together was the prophets, the Bible, the spirituality that was so important to each one of them, and to causes of moral justice for our society. And my father and Dr. King immediately started giving lectures together. They spoke to Jewish groups and to college groups, and when they did, Dr. King immediately began speaking on behalf of Soviet Jews. My father was involved in the Free Soviet Jewry movement very early on, and I actually remember the first time my father was to give a lecture on behalf of Soviet Jews. My mother was reading his speech before he left the house, and she said, "You know, you're going to get attacked for this." And my father said, "Yes, I know," because the general atmosphere at the time was shah still, be quiet. Don't speak out as a Jew on behalf of other Jews. Let the government handle this, or it should be handled privately, silently, quietly, behind the scenes. But my father spoke out, and Dr. King spoke out. And I think that their voices were so important. Dr. King brought his support for the Free Soviet Jewry movement to the Black community, especially to Black churches. And he made it so clear that freedom for one is freedom for all. We all have to live in freedom and justice. And he also understood what was so important for my father, which was that Soviet Jews were being deprived of the opportunity to learn Hebrew. It was illegal to learn Hebrew. The opportunity to daven, to practice Judaism, was forbidden. To daven, to pray to the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So for my father, this was wrenching and terribly painful, because of course it reminded him of what he had experienced in Germany when Hitler came to power. So it was a very crucial issue for my father. And I think in many ways also Dr. King helped us as Jews, because one of the mottos at the time was Black is beautiful. And Jews felt, yes, and being Jewish is also beautiful. And we too should be marching for our rights and not hiding and not pretending or somehow keeping quiet about issues of great moral importance. I mentioned also that when I was a child, Elie Wiesel, who at the time was not yet married, he was single, and he lived a few blocks away from us in Riverside Drive. And he used to come over to our home on Shabbat afternoon. You know, after we went to shul and we had lunch, my parents would take a nap, and then in the afternoon, my father would go for a walk with Elie Wiesel. And I know my father encouraged him to go to the Soviet Union. And he came back and wrote this extraordinary book, The Jews of Silence.
If we stand together, I think we can overcome almost anything. Thank you, Dr. Heschel. Another issue.
I want to
Would you like to respond? Of course, Mr. Sharansky,
first
go
of all,
ahead.
thank you, Dr. Heschel. It was so moving and so important to hear, because what you just now said, I heard it so many times from some American Jews who are coming to help us. And they were saying how they participated in the protests in Atlanta, in bus demonstrations, how it was called, that but they were sitting in the buses together with the black people in order to express their solidarity, and because with Martin Luther King, and how it helped them to recognize, to understand that it's okay to fight also for your own identity. That's part of universal cause.
Absolutely.
You know, for many Jews, it was very important to understand that while fighting for their people, they're not. It's not against universal values. That's in support of universal values, and that's why it's very important that it worked really both ways.
All right. Well, Dr. Heschel, another issue close to your father's heart was the plight of Soviet Jewry, and he was a prominent advocate on their behalf until his death in 1972. We actually have an excerpt of a speech he gave in 1963 in the movement's earliest days. Let's take a listen.
For so many years, a systematic process of liquidation of millions of Jews, of spiritual liquidation of millions of Jews, is going on in Soviet Russia. It is above all, and first of all, at this moment, a central religious concern to me. How can I call myself a Jew and remain indifferent to the extinction of so many Jews, of the spiritual extinction? Remember, there is no other people in the world which is so absolutely committed to the sanctity of human rights and the equality of all men as our people. Our history is the most emphatic testimony that injustice to some men spells the doom of all men. We will get the support and the public support from the Protestant and Catholic leadership, from the Negro leadership, in our effort to help save the Russian Jews from complete extinction. One of the tragic failures of the ancient Judaism, I repeat, was the indifference to the 10 lost tribes. Let us not repeat that terrible sin. I would like to spend the next 3 minutes by saying to you just a few words in Yiddish in honor of the Russian Jews, most of whom still speak Yiddish. Mir fielen noch als dem Sätze über den Kopf. Es dürft sich, als der Himmel über uns zerfällt in Stücke. Wir haben noch als die Teufels gewesen, den Bruch und das Unglück, was hat uns getroffen. Wir sind noch als wie Fardeleweihe. Noch nicht gerät sich setzen Schiffe. Zertummelt, zerbrochen, zermischt und versteinert. For so many years.
Dr. Heschel, just from watching your reactions during that, I could tell it was an emotional experience for you to hear that. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about this speech, your father's message in Yiddish, and his advocacy on behalf of Soviet Jewry?
So this is just a few minutes in Yiddish at the end of a lecture that my father gave. He was together with Martin Luther King on that occasion, and it was a lecture to the United Synagogue of America, which is an organization of lay conservative Jews. And he spoke in Yiddish, and I actually think that there are many ways in which the civil rights movement made Jews, young Jews, but all Jews think we also have something, an ethnicity that we want to not to be ashamed of. You know, Charles Silberman, the great sociologist, wrote a book called A Certain People, and he described in 1950s Jews would hide their Jewishness. They would get a nose job. Children would hide their Hebrew books when they went to public school and so forth. And after the civil rights movement, that ended. Jews felt very comfortable expressing. But what my father says in this speech, and I think the impetus, you know, it comes from my father's own experience of having lived in Nazi Germany, of having struggled to bring his mother, his sisters, his family out, and he couldn't. He couldn't get them visas to come here. And he said, you know, in this Yiddish speech, We need to say Kaddish for our souls, because it's as if our souls were hardened, as if our conscience went up in flames in Auschwitz and Medina, along with their bodies. How can it be today that we still light Shabbos candles, we still continue with our lives as if what? As if nothing happened? So for my father, the horror was translated into action. What do we need to do as Jews and as all human beings? All of us. And he felt a tremendous imperative to rescue the Jews from the Soviet Union. And he spoke about this as a spiritual annihilation, a spiritual extinction. He wanted to rescue them the way he had tried to rescue his family from Nazi Europe. The Jews in the Soviet Union were losing their Jewish identity, which is so important to my father, and the religious identity, which to my father is the core of being a Jew, Torah and mitzvahs, and Ahavas Hashem, and love of God. And that's what Jewish education, by the way, should be. That's the core of being a Jew. And then we stand up, and our voices should be loud and clear.
All right, a lot of important points there. Thank you, Professor Heschel, for those fascinating insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Last year, the great civil rights activist John Lewis passed away at the age of 80. Lewis was a longtime ally of the Jewish people, and he co-founded the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations. On December 6, 1987, Lewis, who was then at the start of his congressional career, addressed 250,000 people who gathered on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. for the Freedom Sunday for Soviet Jews rally. Let's see his remarks now.
I stand here not so much as a member of Congress, but I stand here as a human being. For almost 25 years ago, I participated in a march here for jobs and freedom. Hundreds and thousands members of the Jewish community marched with us then. I think it's fitting for me to be here with you today. Our message, the message of the Black community is one that is very simple. We are saying to President Reagan, Mr. President, tell Mr. Gorbachev to open the doors, open the gates, and let the people out. I said that as long as one Jew is denied the right to immigrate, as long as one Jew is denied the right to be Jewish in the Soviet Union, we all are Jews in the Soviet Union. What I'd like to do right now is to read a brief statement from Mrs. Coretta Scott King. Although a previous commitment prevents me from being with you in person, I want to join you in spirit by expressing my warm greetings and wholehearted endorsement of the rally for Soviet Jewry. My husband, Martin Luther King Jr., was deeply concerned about what he called the spiritual and cultural genocide being forced on Soviet Jewry by the Soviet government. In this same spirit, I am proud to support the cause of freedom and human rights for Soviet Jewry.
Intercommunal partnerships were so critically important during the civil rights movement in the United States, and indeed during the movement to free Soviet Jewry. In a country as diverse as the United States and elsewhere in an increasingly interconnected world, community-based partnerships are essential building blocks in today's struggle against resurgent anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry. As we witness a horrific rise in attacks and hate speech targeting Jews around the world, intercommunal partnerships can help guard against rising hate. Non-Jewish faith leaders played a key role in the Free Soviet Jewry movement, helping spread its message to a broader audience. Two such leaders who were tirelessly committed to the liberation of Soviet Jews were Catholic leaders, Sister Anne Gillen and Father Robert Drinan. Sister Anne Gillen from Texas was a nun dedicated to drawing the attention of the Christian world to the dire situation of the Jews in the Soviet Union. From 1972 to 1987, she was the executive director of the National Interreligious Task Force on Soviet Jewry, patrolling the corridors of power worldwide to build support for aiding Soviet Jews. Let's pause for a moment to hear her, in her own words, talk about her work for the task force.
So the task force really represents Jews and Christians, both Catholics and Protestants and Orthodox, to educate the American public in terms of the plight of the Soviet Jews as a human rights struggle. It is something which affects all of us. And we had very eloquent speakers there at the first national consultation, drawn from every spectrum of life in the American society, and voicing their concern for men and women who are part of the human family. They may be on another side of the globe, and yet here in this country there are religious people, both Christians and Jews, who say that as long as the Soviet Jews are denied their basic human rights, these interreligious people will continue to work to give them their freedom.
Sister Anne often traveled to the Soviet Union, where she visited refuseniks in their homes, and she was detained and searched by the authorities there many times. She also regularly picketed Soviet embassies in capital cities across the globe. Each time she talked with a friend or an adversary, Sister Anne would conclude the conversation with the biblical words, "Let my people go." Sister Anne passed away in January 1995 in Pennsylvania at the age of 76. She was part of the Order of the Society of the Holy Child Jesus and was buried wearing 2 necklaces, a cross and a Star of David. May her memory be a blessing. Father Robert Drinan, a priest, lawyer, and human rights activist from Boston, Massachusetts, served as a Democrat in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1971 to 1981, where he became a great advocate for Jewish communities on Capitol Hill. During his decade as a legislator, Father Drinan was a leading voice addressing the plight of oppressed Soviet Jews, founding the National Interreligious Task Force on Soviet Jewry, and chairing the International Committee for Anatoly Sharansky. In 1976 and 1983, he was a member of the Jewish Community Council's delegation to the 2nd and 3rd World Conferences on Soviet Jewry. Father Drinan also authored the book Honor the Promise: America's Commitment to Israel. Even after leaving Congress, he continued serving as a bridge between the Christian and Jewish communities. Father Drinan once joked that the letters SJ at the end of his official title, which stood for Society of Jesus, actually meant somewhat Jewish. Father Drinan passed away in Washington in January 2007 at the age of 86, yet his legacy of interfaith solidarity will long outlive him. Now, I understand, Mr. Sharansky, that you'd like to say a few words.
Let me say some words about Father Drinan.
Go ahead.
It was probably 1975 when he came to Moscow, and I was told that there will be some congressman who will come to Moscow, and there was just at that moment the trial of the prisoner of Zion Future, Anatoly Malkin. And I took him there. And we stood near the entrance of the court. Nobody, of course, permitted us to go to the court. I said, "Are you not afraid?" He said, "I am afraid. If you guys are not afraid, why should I be afraid?" That was the first priest that I ever, Catholic priest, or Jesuit priest, Jesuit Catholic that I ever saw in my life. And I didn't know how to speak, and he was so informal and so curious. He asked all the details about this Anatoly Malkin, but then about our life. And he was so sympathetic and so involved. And then he said, "Well, I'm not going to leave this cause." And I knew that he became one of the most strong voices of our support in Congress. I can tell you later when I was arrested, and when KGB tried to make me feel that nobody is fighting for us. And I wanted to show to them that I know that it's true, lies. I told them, "Well, what you tell me? Even when I'm in prison, I know very well that Father Drinan at this moment is fighting for us." They were almost in shock, because I didn't know that at that moment he officially became the chairman of the committee for struggle for values. But I simply invented it. But it was bingo. It was exactly, he was one of those that we always felt we can rely on them. That these are people who are so emotionally involved in our cause, they will never stop fighting.
Sounds like a very special person.
Yeah, very special.
All right, now staying with the interfaith theme, we'll now speak with Majid Al-Sayegh, chairman of the board of the Dialogue Institute, which engages religious, civic, and academic leaders to build relationships across religious and cultural lines. Majid also serves on the American Jewish Committee's Muslim Jewish Advisory Council. Mr. Al-Sayegh, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to start with this question. Why did you first get involved in interfaith work? And can you please explain to us some of the initiatives you've been involved in to bring faith communities together, both on a grassroots level and a political level?
Good morning. Salam and shalom. Nice to see both of you today. I'm an immigrant. I was born in the biblical city of Nineveh, in what's called today Mosul, Iraq, to an Iraqi Muslim father and Christian mother. Our family, for generations, had been reaching out, working with individuals of different faiths and cultures. My grandfather was a jeweler. His partner was a Jewish jeweler. So we have a family tradition of working across differences. And I've continued throughout my adult life, immigrating to the United States as a 19-year-old. I've been a co-founder of nonprofits that bring people together around music and culture. I'm a member of the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, the Inter-Jewish Muslim Alliance. I seldom say no when asked to sit down with my Jewish sisters and brothers to talk about commonalities and also to address some of the challenges that face our communities.
Well, we are very happy to have you with us. Sir, just as Father Drinan and Sister Gillen did nearly half a century ago, how can we better bring Muslim, Jewish, and Christian communities together in the United States, Europe, the Middle East, and everywhere else to combat anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other forms of intolerance?
Some of the endeavors that work well are trying to find opportunities where our communities share common cause. In America, we've seen an increase in hate crimes and hate speech against Jews, against Muslims, against other minorities. We, at the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, we've spent 5 years going to Congress and working for hate crime laws. And just last week, the hate crime law that was passed was the result of, in part, our efforts over the last 3 years to pass that law. Members of the council met with dozens of senators and members of Congress, and we would go in, 2 Jews, 2 Muslims, hand in hand, saying, we need your help, we need your support for this bill. And it was not easy work, but it was successful to accomplish something that helps both of our communities. We need to continue along those lines and address the anti-Semitism in our Muslim communities and the anti-Muslim bigotry in our Jewish communities. We do that through education, through helping our communities humanize the other, not demonize the other. And we still obviously have a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you for your contribution to this cause, and thank you for joining us today and providing us with your valuable perspective. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
The Combat Anti-Semitism movement is a leading proponent of forging stronger interfaith ties between communities. From its annual interfaith iftar to its special recognition of Muslim World League Secretary General Sheikh Mohammed Al-Isa last year, CAM strives to reach across traditional divides and pave a better path forward for humanity. Overcoming religious hatred is a vital goal that requires a sustained collective effort, and unity is what CAM tries to nurture every day through its activities. Political leadership was also a necessary component of the struggle to free Soviet Jews. Without strong and influential figures in Washington, D.C. helping pave the way, the path to freedom for Soviet Jews would have been even longer and more treacherous. 2 politicians particularly deserving of recognition are Senator Henry Scoop Jackson, a Democrat from Washington State, and George Shultz, who held top roles in 3 Republican administrations, including serving as President Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State from 1982 to 1989. Senator Henry Jackson was one of the most consequential U.S. senators of the post-World War II generation, serving in the chamber from 1953 until his death in 1983. His legislative accomplishments covered both domestic and international concerns during his long and distinguished career. He was a proponent of civil rights, the environment, and a strong national defense. His experiences during the Second World War shaped his strong support for Israel, fighting anti-Semitism, and, of course, seeking freedom for Soviet Jews. He was the co-sponsor of the 1975 Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which tied the granting of permanent normal trade relations to a country's immigration policies. The success of this amendment eventually led to freeing over 1 million Jews from the USSR and its successor states. Now let's hear Jackson, in his own words, talk about the right of emigration.
After all, it's a part of international law. And if we can't implement international law, which provides that a country who's signatory to that convention, and that's the Soviet Union and the United States, along with over 100 other countries, that we'll honor the right of a person to leave a country freely and return freely, just as clear as anything can be. If we don't have enough moral courage to do that, I think we're in pretty bad shape.
Mr. Sharansky, you'd like to respond to that?
Yeah, well, I have to say that nobody played such an important, nobody's role can be compared to the role of Senator Jackson in all our struggle. Now, in my criminal case, which was case against all our movement, there are hundreds of names of Soviet Jews who were fighting, and hundreds of names of American Jews who were fighting, and of the journalists that I was meeting, and many others. The name which is mentioned in my sentence more than anybody else, dozens and dozens of times, is the name of non-Jew, Senator Jackson. And each time when there was mentioned document, like our letter of Soviet Jewish refuseniks to Senator Jackson in support of his amendment, it was immediately put into the high treason, because Soviets saw him as the main enemy. And in fact, they were right, because he is the one who created this policy of linkage, that without freedom of movement of the people, you Soviets will not get the freedom of movement of the things, of the free trade. And it was just at the moment when Soviet Union thought that they already got it, that now they reach it. President Nixon and the Secretary of State Kissinger are ready to sign this free trade agreement. And he came and said, Senator Jackson said, not without releasing Soviet Jews. And that was the beginning of the new approach of linkage between human rights and international relations. Well, he also played a very important role in supporting people like my wife and the families of refuseniks in the struggle, but his influence on changing all the political course of our struggle, making it creating real political leverage, pressing Soviet Union, is incomparable. It was a great human being, great fighter, and Soviet Jewry movement. We all Soviet Jews have to remember the name of this great person.
Well, let's now move on to somebody who also helped with this fight. George Shultz is one of only 2 individuals to hold 4 different cabinet positions. As Secretary of State in 1980, he played a major role in shaping President Reagan's foreign policy, including U.S.-Soviet relations. Secretary Shultz ensured that human rights in general and the plight of Soviet Jews in particular was one of the 4 pillars of U.S. policy toward the USSR. Secretary Shultz met with many refuseniks during his visits to Moscow. He even participated in a Passover Seder for Soviet Jews with President Reagan at the U.S. ambassador's residence in Moscow. A man of great principle, he will be long remembered for his contributions to the freeing of hundreds of thousands of Soviet Jews. Here is Shultz in his own words speaking on the issue in May 1988. Take a listen.
Soviet Jewish dissident support groups lobbied administration officials in Helsinki today to keep the pressure on Moscow, stirring the normally placid Secretary of State Schultz to passionate commitment.
And we really can't see for the life of us why people shouldn't be allowed to live their lives the way they want to live them.
Mr. Sharansky, I wanted to ask you if you had anything to respond to that clip we just watched.
George Shultz knew names of refuseniks. George Shultz felt like his father or grandfather of all those people. And he was saying, coming each time to the Soviet Union, he was saying, let me have free seats in my airplane. Let me take these people. Only one small story. I was still in prison, and there was a summit between the Secretary of State and Soviet partner. And just before Soviet delegation had to have their press conference, some of the people working with Schultz brought my wife, and she, illegally, you can say, and she used this podium to speak about my flight. Next day, there was a huge scandal in an American delegation. They demanded from Schultz to exile my wife from Geneva because Soviets will see it as a big provocation. Wow. And Schultz told, don't dare to touch her. If I one day will be in prison, I want my wife will do it for me too. So he really felt himself part of the family. And at the same time, he was the one who was, together with President Reagan, defining the policy of the United States of America.
Seem to have a very personal connection to the issue. All right, Mr. Sharansky, thank you so much for being with me today and sharing your story. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, for more on the political advocacy component of the Free Soviet Jewry movement, we will now speak with Mark Levin, Executive Vice Chairman and CEO of the National Coalition Supporting Eurasian Jewry. Mr. Levin, can you tell us about some of the main achievements of Jackson and Schultz, and also discuss the bipartisan nature of the political advocacy of this movement? And of course, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for helping put this program together. I think it's taking place at a very important time. You just highlighted two giants of American politics who, as you heard from Mr. Sharansky, had a profound impact on the lives of American Jews, as well as obviously Jews living in the now former Soviet Union. They helped propel what became part and parcel of American foreign policy toward the Soviet Union, which was a major concern for human rights, and obviously a significant amount of attention being paid to the freeing of Soviet Jews. I had the real opportunity to work with both men at a very young age. And in fact, I consider both Senator Jackson and Secretary Schultz mentors. And it's not often that a 20-something is able to sit in rooms and learn firsthand that not just policy, but what it means to have a true commitment to challenging and tackling a totalitarian regime's refusal to adhere to a most basic human right, and that was the freedom of immigration. Senator Jackson and Congressman Vanik did it through their legislation, and Secretary Schultz, as you heard from Mr. Sharansky, did it on multiple occasions in Washington, Moscow, and literally around the world. The irony is that when Secretary Schultz first came to office, there were a lot of questions about where he stood on issues of importance to the American Jewish community because of his tenure as head of Bechtel, which was a large construction company that had many projects in the Middle East. But those concerns were dispelled from the very beginning. In our first meeting with Secretary Schultz, one of our officers said to the secretary, well, I know linking this issue to other issues that are of concern between the United States and Soviet Union, it'll be difficult to do. But Secretary Schultz stopped him and said, it's our intention to link human rights and the plight of Soviet Jewry with every issue and at every opportunity that we have to raise this concern with the Soviet government. And that was a commitment that that was fulfilled by by President Reagan and Secretary Shultz.
Sir, we are now looking at footage of the Freedom Sunday rally on December 6th, 1987.
It was an historic moment for the Jewish community of this nation. They came from everywhere, by plane, train, car, and mostly by bus. Thousands upon thousands of Jews and non-Jews from Maine to California and Canada as well. They streamed into Washington with but one common agenda: let our people go. On the eve of the Washington summit, the march and the rally, planned in the main by Jewish organizations, but supported as well by groups such as the National Council of Churches, the Conference of Catholic Bishops, the AFL-CIO, the Conference of Mayors, and many, many ethnic organizations. It was the largest gathering by the American Jewish community in its history.
Can you recall for us what this rally was all about, and why and how did it happen?
It's one of the great achievements of the organized American Jewish community, and it was organized for a very simple reason, for a very simple purpose, and that was to send as strong and loud a message as possible to President Gorbachev on his first visit to the United States. Interestingly, the genesis of the march actually began a few years before. We actually began preparations for a potential Reagan-Gorbachev meeting in 1985. And the blueprint that was followed in 87 actually had its origins 2 years before. We, and I say we, the American Jewish community, led by NCSEJ, the Federation System, and many others, had about 7 weeks to organize this event. And Mr. Sharansky and other then former Soviet Jewish activists played a large part in helping turn out one of the largest marches ever to take place in Washington, D.C. It was on a cold sunny December Sunday afternoon where 250,000 Americans, and I underline Americans, because it was not just American Jews, but it was Americans from every walk of life who gathered in our nation's capital to send a very definitive message to President Gorbachev on his arrival in Washington. And it was very simple: to let our people go. And on that stage, on that Sunday afternoon, were representatives from every part of the political spectrum in the United States, from every segment of American society. Vice President Bush, the Speaker of the House Wright, we had the Senate and majority and minority leaders. There were members of Congress from both political parties and from the full ideological spectrum. We had representatives from the arts world, from the trade union community. You name it, people were there. And it is truly, I think, after the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, it is truly the next highest moment in American Jewish community life.
Well, you've described for us in detail what that rally looked like, but what impact did that rally have on the movement as a whole moving forward?
It had a tremendous impact. It reinforced a message that had been delivered to the Soviets for years, both from inside from inside governments as well as from activists around the world, is that we were not going to rest until every Soviet Jew had the right to immigrate. Now, it took a little bit of time after the rally, but in the succeeding months and years, over 1 million Jews were able to make Aliyah to Israel or emigrate elsewhere. So it was it was obviously a high point, but it also sent a forceful message to the Soviet government that we weren't going anywhere.
Thank you so much, Mr. Levin, for helping us paint the picture of that very important moment in both American and world history. Now, can you please do us the honor of introducing our next guest?
Yes, it is my pleasure to introduce U.S. Congresswoman Grace Meng, who is serving her 5th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. Representative Meng represents the 6th District of New York, encompassing the New York City Borough of Queens. Congresswoman Meng serves on the influential House Appropriations Committee. She is also one of the co-chairs of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Antisemitism. Representative Meng, I want to congratulate you on your leadership role in the passage of the COVID-19 Anti-Asian Hate Crimes Bill recently signed into law by President Biden. Congresswoman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, for that kind introduction. It's great to be here today with all of you. And while I wish we could be physically together, I'm grateful that this virtual platform allows me to join with so many leaders in the movement to combat anti-Semitism, including, of course, Natan Sharansky, and with so many thousands of you. My name is Grace Meng, and I represent the 6th District of New York in Queens. I'm also a co-chair of the Bipartisan Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism and serve as vice chair of the State and Foreign Operations House Appropriations Subcommittee. Before I begin, I want to say that my heart is with the Jewish community this week, as we've seen a dramatic increase in anti-Semitic incidents, particularly in my home city of New York. As Asian Americans know too well, regardless of their political views, people should not be discriminated against based on political decisions taken in another country. American Jews should never be targeted because of the actions of the Israeli government. When anti-Semitic tropes are used to criticize the actions of the State of Israel, it threatens the safety of Jews around the world. As someone who has faced the claim of dual loyalty based on my own heritage, I know how hurtful and dangerous that accusation can be. But I remain hopeful. The solidarity between the Asian American and Jewish communities has never been stronger. As so many of you already know, against the backdrop of a global pandemic, it has been a particularly difficult year for the Asian American community across the US, as we've been living in terror and fear. As the Asian American community has learned to flex its still young advocacy muscles, the Jewish community was the first to reach out to help. Unfortunately, the Jewish community knows all too well the heartbreaking challenges that come with facing discrimination. The legacy of the Jewish community's work during the Soviet Jewry movement has created a playbook that so many of us who suffer discrimination on the basis of race or religion have continued. The foundation of that movement, of course, was in lifting up the stories and voices of those who were persecuted, creating a coalition of unlikely partners to advocate on this issue, creating both national and international movements, and maintaining bipartisan support in the US. Over the past year, the Jewish community has helped to train our leaders on tracking hate crimes and how to report them. I can't overestimate the degree to which this has helped save lives. In particular, we appreciate the strong support from the Jewish community for my COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which was signed into law by President Biden last week. While the impetus of my bill was in reaction to the dramatic increase in hate crimes against the API community, this is a bill for every community. It will assign a point person at the Department of Justice to quickly review hate crimes, issue guidance for local law enforcement to create online reporting in multiple languages, expand public education campaigns to make our communities more comfortable to report these incidents, encourage law enforcement prevention, training, and education on hate crimes, and establish a hate crimes hotline. This is not the end, though. The answer to racism is solidarity. We must continue to stand up for each other and against hate. Thank you for having me on this important day.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Meng, for your leadership in the fight against bigotry and hatred. We're witnessing today a rise in anti-Semitism from across the political and ideological spectrums. Whether in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, the Middle East, or elsewhere, it is critically important that the fight against Jew hatred remains apolitical. As new manifestations of and trends in anti-Semitism continue to emerge, it must be condemned and combated whenever and wherever it rears its ugly head. The Soviet Jewry movement in the United States galvanized the leaders of both major political parties and unified the nation in a collective effort to free millions of Soviet Jews. In order to effectively diminish contemporary forms of anti-Semitism, this is an important lesson to keep in mind. Now, we'd like to show one of the more lighthearted moments from the Soviet Jewry movement. Gilda Radner was a Jewish-American actress and comedian who was one of the 7 original cast members for NBC's comedy show Saturday Night Live. You might be familiar with it. In one of her SNL skits, Radner parodied the confusion of some who showed up to Free Soviet Jewry rallies looking for free Soviet jewelry. This skit illustrated how the movement energized a generation of grassroots activists, so much so that it penetrated mainstream popular culture, which ultimately helped the movement succeed. I hope you enjoy this throwback clip.
Weekend Update recognizes its obligation to present responsible opposing viewpoints to our editorials. Here to reply to a recent editorial is Miss Emily Litella.
What's all this fuss I hear about saving Soviet jewelry? Now, what makes Soviet jewelry so special? Will it be worth more in a few years? Why, with prices the way they are today, all jewelry will be worth more. Now, if I recall correctly, Mrs. Khrushchev didn't wear very much jewelry, and her husband, the premier, didn't even wear a watch. Not a Mickey Mouse watch, anyway. Why, they wouldn't even let him into Disneyland. And now he's dead. Well, I'm infuriated. Save Soviet jewelry. Where are we going to put it? I say keep it over there with all of their ballet dancers. Let them keep their own jewelry and their ballet dancers. As a matter of fact, why don't they get the ballet dancers to save the jewelry? Americans have more important things to save, like gas and electricity. And what about our fuel? Now that's important, not jewelry.
Miss Litella.
What?
It's jewelry, not jewelry.
It's what?
It's Soviet Jewry. The editorial was about jewelry, not jewelry.
Oh, well, that's very important.
Yes.
Never mind.
Well, grassroots activism is what drove the Free Soviet Jewry movement. Now, to share with us his memories as a young activist in the movement, we have with us now Rabbi Emeritus of Atlanta's Temple Emmanuel, Stanley Davids. His distinguished career saw him serve as chairman of the Central Conference of American Rabbis and president of the Association of Reform Zionists of America, among other important roles. Thank you so much, Rabbi, for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Good to be here. It's important.
So first of all, Rabbi Davids, what drew you to the Soviet Jewry cause as a young man, and how did you first get involved in the movement?
Well, that's fairly easy. In the late 1960s, for the very first time, I met Elie Wiesel, and I was totally taken by him and by, of course, Jews of Silence, which came out in 1966. After having spent a little bit of time with Elie, he drew me into the Soviet Jewry movement, and every step that followed was that. So when I speak about grassroots activism, I'm going to speak about two things. One, highly attractive, important leadership and people who come into the process already committed to Jewish survival and to a meaningful Jewish existence. You can't lecture people into that. You have to be open to their participation. So that's how I got started.
So, sir, can you tell us about your activities on behalf of Soviet Jews, which included trips to the Soviet Union itself, among other places?
Yeah, it's a different world. Look, I was never an international or national leader. I was a middle person in the grassroots organization, and that's a great place to be. So when the Bolshoi came to Milwaukee in 1970, I was in the picket lines. In 1971, Ellie made certain that I was invited as a delegate to the First World Conference on Soviet Jewry that opened in Brussels, and that began the whole process of world gatherings in support of world Jewry. Then the Union of Councils of Soviet Jewry began to invite people to go to the Soviet Union to smuggle, to make contact, to gather information. All of that totally outside of my area of expertise, but it was something that I felt I had to do. The activism came from within, so I went. I went in 1979, I had to get a new passport. I took my son with me to the post office while I lied to the post office that I had lost my passport because my passport showed a number of visits to Israel. That's good teaching for kids. I smuggled all kinds of stuff into the Soviet Union for the refuseniks. And again, embarrassingly, including dirty postcards with which the prisoners would bribe the Soviet guards. I don't admit to that most oftenly. I also brought a book with me, Irma Bombeck's, what is it called? The Grass is Always Greener on a Septic Tank. And the reason I selected that book was that it had a lot of white spaces. And I had equipment so that I could take down names and information in disappearing ink in the white spaces in the book. So I am forever grateful to Irma Bombeck for that. In the Soviet Union, my room was bugged. Oh, it was great fun getting the smuggled materials through customs and arguing with the customs officials why I had to move quickly and they just had to let me through. Besides, I am a mild-mannered academic, not a rabbi, not an activist. Visited refusenik homes, drank far more vodka than I ever had in my life, taken to a primary school, hidden, illegal in Moscow, and taught Israeli folk songs. Came back from that with names, with information, with powerful insights, which I shared with the people who were running the movement. I then became involved in helping to organize rallies. I was arrested picketing the Soviet consulate in New York City on behalf of Soviet Jewry. That was fun because it was Erev Yom Kippur. Footnote, don't plan to get arrested for protesting Erev Yom Kippur unless you're in New York with police people who really do understand. Then in January of 1990, went back to the Soviet Union, went back as part of what was called then the Global Conference of Spiritual and Parliamentary Leadership. Al Gore was there, a whole bunch of interesting people. Yeah, met Gorbachev, he was there. The point being that it gave me a second chance to meet with Soviet refuseniks whom I had met previously. We brought food from our El Al flight to the apartments of these refuseniks who by this time were starving. And they fell upon leftover El Al packaged food in order to survive. And the rest of that evening, I will never, never forget being surrounded by people in fear, asking, please take my name, help me get a visa. We've got to get out. We can't survive this. In the process, the group of people I met that night in Moscow then became the nucleus for the first Reform congregation in the Soviet Union, Congregation Hineni. The impact of simple, ordinary people who are committed to a cause and willing, frankly, to enter into a world of danger made all the difference in the world. As a matter of fact, for my first visit, I remember my wife telling our children, Dad is doing something important. He is going to work with our people in the Soviet Union. We don't know when we are going to see him again, but this is important. So, you know, there's so many stories, but the point is the same. The passion, the identification with the Jewish people came from within. It can't be lectured about. It can't be kindled by outside forces. We have to learn to speak to people right now who are opposing anti-Semitism and help them understand that change arises from the base, from the grassroots.
Well, there's certainly a lot that we can learn from you, and I'm sure you have many more stories to tell. But first, what lessons do you think the Free Soviet Jewry movement has for young activists today fighting contemporary anti-Semitism, and how can we best mobilize a new generation of these activists?
It's a very difficult question. As I thought about the question, you prepped me in advance. I'm supposed to think about this kind of a thing. I thought about the example of Bernie Sanders, not because of his economic and political positions, but because how an elderly gentleman can speak to young people who were not yet able to focus their political energies. And I began to think about this issue of how to motivate Jews, young Jews, to become active in battling anti-Semitism. The Bernie Sanders model is pretty good. Speak truth. Provide opportunities for people to get involved at the smallest level. Do they still stuff envelopes? I don't know. Or sending emails, whatever, Instagram. From the smallest level, get people involved where they can begin to see that step by step by step, what they do matters. That's what happened to me. When I first attended my first rally, my first protest, I said to myself, you know, being here actually makes a difference in a screwed up world. I can be of help to my people. I would go that route. I would do it. It's not top down. It's getting people practically involved. I have more faith in the young people of our generation. I think we have failed to engage them properly. They are bright, they are ready, but we have to find ways to get them to feel the impact of their own involvement. They can make a difference. What is a better message for a young person? Think about it. What you do can make a difference to make this world, to make this world a better place. Join us so that you can leave a better world for your family, for those who come after you. Rather than just pushing at how terrible anti-Semitism is, they know it. Give them doorways, channels. I would have said tunnels with Hamas. You don't speak about tunnels, but fine. Give them doorways into activism and to see immediate return on their involvement.
A lot of really great points. Rabbi Davids, thank you so much for inspiring us and for sharing with us today your personal experiences from the Free Soviet Jewry movement. Thank you very much.
And thank you for what you're doing.
We will now go to Combat Anti-Semitism Executive Director Sasha Roitman-Dratwa for a few words as we wrap up today's symposium. Sasha, thank you for joining me in the studio today.
First of all, thanks to you for hosting this wonderful event, to welcoming all the speakers, and thanks to all the speakers that took the time to be with us today to share their lessons from the past and how we're going to make a better future for the Jewish people and for all. To close this session and this wonderful event, I would like to play a short part of Natan Sharansky's speech at a rally in Washington, D.C. Let's watch it together.
I heard that it is impossible to make American Jews to come in hundreds of thousands to Washington in the winter. And here you came and the winter retreated. How many times from the very beginning of our struggle we heard that it is impossible to open the gates of the Soviet Union. And we didn't listen to these voices. And we struggled, and you demonstrated, and you struggled, and that's why 250,000 Jews were released, and that's why I and other prisoners of Zion today are free.
These were the words of Natan Sharansky calling on the world to stand up and to show that we can make it together. Today, again, we need to stand up against hatred, all forms of hatred. But mainly, we've seen in the past weeks, Jews being attacked all over the world. And yet again, it took time for us to stand up and to show the world that we are a strong nation with strong people. We need to listen to the words of Natan Sharansky, and it's our time to do peace with ourselves and to come forward. Like Malcolm said earlier in the program, it's not about being an organization, it's about being a movement of people, a movement of organization that we believe in one cause, fighting hatred and bigotry. And we cannot do that alone. We need to have our allies, Christian allies, Muslim allies, all minorities allies, because only together we're going to make this happen. For today, for me, it was very important, a very important day. Since from the beginning, when we set up and we create the Combat Antisemitism movement, we build on the vision and the ideology of the Soviet Jewry movement that help and make sure that all Jews from these countries were liberated. So again, this is our turn, the young generation, to learn from those that did that in the past, to come together and liberate the world from hatred. We have seen too much hatred as the Jewish people. We need to build alliances and come forward with new idea and new ideology. So I invite everyone to come and to join the Combat Antisemitism movement, to make the fight against antisemitism as our own main ideology and main goal. I would like to thank everyone for watching us today. Visit our website, combatantisemitism.org, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for your words, and thank you, of course, for putting this important symposium together today.
Thanks to you.
On that inspiring note, we have come to the end of today's special event. We hope you learned more about the history of the Free Soviet Jewry movement and how the lessons from its success can be applied to contemporary challenges facing Jewish communities across the globe, particularly in the United States, where the need for strong interfaith and intercommunal partnerships is as vital as ever. Remember, if you missed any part of the program, a full recording will soon be available on the symposium's website, as well as all of the Combat Antisemitism Movement's social media platforms. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Lauren Izzo. Goodbye for now.
It's a joy to present to you the singers of conscience for the American people, devoted advocates of the cause of Soviet Jewry and the oppressed everywhere, Mary Travers and Peter Yarrow.
Don't let the light go out. Light one candle for the Maccabee children, with thanks that their light didn't die. Light one candle for the pain they endured when their right to exist was denied. Light one candle for the terrible sacrifice justice and freedom demand. But light one candle for the wisdom to know when the peacemaker's time is at hand. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out, let it shine through our love and our tears. Don't let the light go out, don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out, let it shine through